When we suggested this topic back in January, the third lockdown had been with us for 3 or 4 weeks. That awful coronavirus graph had started to climb. Some churches have made the move back to meeting in person, and then they've made the move back to meeting in screens. It must have been on screens for nearly a year already. Been so many frustrations at not doing church the way we used to, or the way we would like to, or the way we think we should do. Some people will be tempted to just get back to the good old days, pick up where we left off. But today we'll be trying to work out if that is the best option for us now. I'm sure we're convinced that continuing with pajama church, as Mark Baker phrases it, is just perfect with that hint of disdain for it. We don't want to stay with pajama church any longer than we really need to. Also, I suspect that we fear that some of our people, probably more particularly the fringe members, will find it ideal for staying at a distance. And that introduces more tension to what we'll be discussing today, which is the in-between position. Because I can see one big problem with what we've got on screen, the way to back where we were. It's 1 year backwards, and life around us has moved on, and technology around us has had to not just move on, but to leap forwards. So I wonder if we need to consider that during this last year, we've been forced to cover the ground that churches would perhaps only have considered and introduced over maybe a decade. So in this last year, we've done rapid trial and error testing of technologies that we might have smoothly adapted to if we hadn't been forced to by the coronavirus crisis. So rather than having been put off by the circumstances in which it was all introduced, I'd like us to consider, what have we found that works and that we find we can now use more beneficially? What I thought I'd do is start off by sharing what we've been doing at Tuckymill. Not that I think that's any great example, but just a benchmark, I suppose, really. And then what I think might be the pros and cons of streaming versus Zoom. And of course, that's very much up for discussion. Then move on to the pluses of hybrid, our hopes at Tuckymill with hybrid, and the downside and the concerns of hybrid. So what we've been doing, and I think it's really very simple. We've been using Zoom since early last year, since April. And we've settled into what is for us now a fairly comfortable pattern. So for Sunday mornings, for example, on the Saturday, I send around notices for the week. And actually, also the words of songs that we're going to sing on Sunday morning, I send that around by email. The songs that we use on Sunday morning are played from YouTube videos that typically I'll have downloaded. And sometimes it's useful to send the URL of those around in advance if it's a new song, so people can learn it in advance. And all of this, by the way, is accounted for in TCLI. There are several spots during the service when people can pray. The reading we share around using PowerPoint. It's the kind of thing that you've actually got on screen now, but that instead of notes like this, it will be Bible verses successively coming up. And each person, if they want, can unmute and read that verse or two. The sermon itself comes up on screen as well with the verses from the Bible or various illustrations using PowerPoint. And typically I record the sermon. I have on occasion pre-recorded it, a practice a bit like I'm doing now. And that gets loaded to YouTube, and from the YouTube short reference thing, you can paste that into Facebook or paste that into your own church website. So that's available for people to catch up on, and sometimes, of course, nobody views it, and sometimes you get 2 or 3. Communion we typically have at the end of Sunday mornings, and that's typically led by various of the church members, male members of the church. And there's usually time to do some sharing, put that in quote marks, sharing and prayer before people finally log off. Sunday evenings is actually a lot simpler. It's usually a led discussion. Quite often it's been based on the morning sermon with some questions to follow up. Or we could just have a video from YouTube and maybe want to discuss that afterwards as well. Midweek meetings, a variety of things we can do. Our prayer meeting, we changed the time slightly because people preferred that, but it's slightly shorter than we used to have because we can't break for coffee partway through, but same kind of things as usual. And we've really been liking the Grace Baptist Mission videos. Those are shared on screen, Salsa videos, anything that you like can probably be shared on screen. The men's and the women's Bible studies, which used to meet the ladies at the chapel, or men went to their local coffee place. They've been going on Zoom for the last year. They've upped the frequency from monthly to fortnightly. Teams group is really quite difficult to keep going. It's not kept going consistently. We're trying to pull it together again now. And church members meetings, by the way, we've been able to do actually, I think, quite successfully through Zoom. And if you think about it, it means everyone has access to all the documents they need to, so long as the person in charge has got them on their computer, because screen share means you don't have to worry about someone's come and said, have you got a spare agenda and stuff like that. It's all sorted. And it saves trees as well, because of course you send these documents around electronically. People really want to print them out. It's amazing how if they've got to use their own ink and paper, they might not think it quite so necessary. So that's just what we do. And you might well have thought of better ways to do various of these things yourselves. Streaming versus Zoom, pros and cons. Why did we opt for Zoom at the start? Well, to be honest, it was because I was hearing various people talk about the immense effort needed to collate an hour's program to be streamed. I thought I could learn to handle the tech for Zoom quickly enough to get something going quickly enough. Pulling together something for streaming would have needed more input than I could manage, particularly at that time when people were in that initial shell shock state. I'm sure you remember that. But on reflection, I think it was a good choice for us. So here are my perceptions of the pros and cons of the two approaches. You may well want to correct me about streaming. This is just my impression. I don't have any experience of it. We've never looked into the tool. I might have got things, some things that are totally wrong. So here we go. 4 things really to look at. Basically, the numbers game for starters is Zoom, I think, greatly favors smaller groups. And the church that we've got, say, a maximum will be about 30 people. And it works okay for that. Streaming, I think you can have as many as you like. So obviously bigger churches would have to move towards streaming, or they'd have to do something to do the smaller group kind of approach. Cost. It's a small subscription required for Zoom. It's actually far less than we've saved in heating bills this last year, I'm sure. But on the streaming side, no, I don't think it necessarily needs this, but I know some churches have invested huge amounts in high quality tech. As I say, we've got a streamer service, we have to have the latest camera, we have to have this and that, and you're looking at 4-figure sums. Now, we haven't spent that much. And I don't think our folks have greatly suffered because of it. Question is, how slick a presence do you want online, I think, as regards how much money you feel you have to invest in that. What about the interactions, the involvement? Zoom, I think you could say, is perhaps almost too easy, because people can, I'm starting to find some people just interrupt. And also, if people haven't muted their microphones, there's funny little noises that come on from time to time, and that can actually be a bit distracting. You know, I've got one person I hear them say from time to time, "Shut up!" Actually, no, they're telling their dog to shut up. They assure me they're telling their dog to shut up. Still, but interactions. I think Zoom can be great for small groups, when most people can just learn to take turns and not all gabble over one another at the same time. But yes, there are those frustrations. And one of the big ones is that singing audibly together is practically impossible. If you've tried it once, you will remember it, and it's horrible. It really is terrible. Everybody needs to be put on mute. But singing along to a video, if you've got a decent song video on YouTube or something like that, I found it quite liberating, actually. But then I suppose it's because I'll have the chance to sit next to Jenny and sing, whereas normally at church, I'm not next to her when we sing. So maybe I've got a slight bias position on that. But actually, strangely enough, the on-screen presence and seeing everybody else's faces, which is good for some people, others just don't like it. And don't say, oh, right, they must be autistic. No, it's not that. I think actually people with autism perhaps handle Zoom better than people face-to-face in person, because I'm finding it quite difficult to keep looking into the right place there so that I'm apparently talking directly to you. Whereas most people on Zoom, they're looking down at their notes or something else, and that eye-to-eye contact is not so sharp. Whereas we've certainly got one person who just does not want to be seen on Zoom, doesn't want their face. They stay out of sight. We're not sure whether they're there or not. So that can be too interactive, too present for some people. Looking on the other side, though, streaming, about kind of the interactions, as far as I understand, it's pretty limited. You can probably type messages in, and you can have someone set to type messages back, or that person can pass them on to the preacher, and can you answer this question, please? But generally speaking, I think interaction is really much more limited. And there is, I think, the possibility too, isn't there, of zero engagement, in that someone has your stream on, but they're not actually paying attention to it at all. I know people can fall asleep, and you sometimes might see that on Zoom, but I've seen that far less on Zoom than people in the pews going to sleep. But I think with streaming, there is that danger. People might be there in name only. Preparation. Well, I think sometimes you can just click on Zoom and up it goes, and there you are. You don't necessarily need a lot of preparation. Whereas if you're going to do streaming, you need to do quite a lot, again, from what I understand. So what would I say are the pluses of hybrid? And you know, on reflection, churches have been slowly moving in this direction a little already. And I don't mean just the last few years. But actually, the days of doing things in person only are long, long gone already. Because we might say we've always had missionaries' prayer letters, even if we go back to times when it took 6 months to come from India. But that's been succeeded in the last century by tapes, then CDs, and now videos. We are moving towards this higher tech, in that higher tech direction anyway. And those kind of things can be read or played or whatever at appropriate meetings. It's not that long ago that I heard of Helston Baptist Church having a live video chat with one of their member missionaries in South America, I think it was, during a service using a mobile. I thought, wow, is that slick or what? But what a good idea. So we have been creeping this way already. It's just that the last year has forced us to do this kind of thing exclusively. And having been exposed to it so forcibly, I think we now realize that we can usefully do quite a lot more. So, for example, think about mission meetings nowadays. You can, as I've just suggested, you can have real-time reports from the field, time zones permitting, of course. When it comes to mission society reps, they can zoom in from anywhere in the country to speak to your little group, and you don't have to be quite so embarrassed that there's only 6 people there and this person has come 400 miles at great expense. So local area reps don't have to arrange a special tour of Cornwall. And all the churches have to think, oh, we club together, so to make sure that they make it worth their while coming this far. So there's a huge advantage there, I think. And just in terms of what you might call special interest prayer groups and committees, a couple of examples there. There's a Caring for Life group that started in January, and meeting by Zoom instead of in a specific location. Well, the central location would have been half an hour from people at the 2 opposite extremities. So it saved them a lot of time. And you have to ask, would it be that some people will come to that when they don't have an hour's travelling, whereas they wouldn't if they had to put that time in on the road? And even before coronavirus, even before the lockdown, my first experience of Zoom was a Peninsula Gospel Partnership Steering Committee, which of course covers Devon and Cornwall. And instead of going an hour up the road to Lifton, we met via Zoom. So those kind of things. Why ever will we go back to meeting in person for those kind of things that would actually take so much more time and effort? I can see this staying for things like that. But think also in terms of evening meetings, particularly, or what you might call, I think that's an Americanism, shut-ins more generally. People who can't get to church for a variety of reasons. Some obviously will be better than others, but particularly during the winter months, I think some people will not come out on Sunday or midweek evenings, but they might still be able to join in using Zoom type hybrid technology. Some people can be there in person, and great, they can actually have coffee and biscuits, share those kind of things between them. The people who can't come in can't get the coffee biscuits, but they can still be there in some realistic ways. So I think there's those pluses with hybrid meetings. What are our hopes about hybrid? Now here's where it gets a bit fuzzier, of course. We know that not all of our folks are going to come back on April the 11th, even if we agree at our church members meeting later this week, that's when we will officially open the doors again. So we're forced to try hybrid for at least a couple of months, starting with Sunday mornings. And I think we'll continue along the same lines that we've developed that I described earlier. But the main questions we're faced with concern making the experience. I know that's a horrible consumeristic phrase to use in the context of church, but the experience, we've got to make that less dire for those attending in person and still subject, because of that, to the restrictions. You know, it's interesting to note that the people who've been most keen to return in person are more likely to be single or the sole Christian in a household. It's very noticeable amongst those people who've said, yes, I'm up for April the 11th. So if we can't sing together yet, but we still must do what we can, what can we make participative and collective? Because there are those people there stuck behind masks, still, I suspect, not really allowed to sing. We've been doing readings on screen, shared on screen, and one and another have been piping up, unmuting, and reading that screen full of Bible. I would like to change the format of that slightly, probably color coding the verses, so that one is read by the congregation behind their masks, not speaking above standard speech volume, and that alternates with somebody in one of the homes reading, amplified of course, so that everyone can hear. And that way there will be sort of dialogue between the group at the church and, if you like, the group dispersed around on video. I think we must find some way to do communion in person at the chapel. Although we're not going to put that back, we're going to put that back to Sunday evenings on Zoom to start with when we get Sunday mornings on hybrid. But there has to be a way that we can do that collectively within the current and slowly lifting legislation and guidance. And now that people can meet outside again and spring is in the air, I guess that we do not have to tell people to go home right away, even if we can't yet lay on refreshments again. But even when we're back to normal, I think there's still a place for using Zoom, particularly for evening meetings. It should enable participation from people who couldn't or wouldn't otherwise join us. I really am not sure about how long to keep this going with our main Sunday morning meetings, though. In practice, I suspect it won't carry on any longer than I'm actually here at the church. And with my being due to retire in a couple of years, I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't go any longer than that. It might not even last that long. What are the downsides of hybrid? Now here, I'm sure you think this as well. Big concern. Will people opt for lower level, less personal involvement? I think this is a big fear. I'm not sure how we tackle it, but we have to. It might actually be a question of we just need to speak to our people. It's a question of, it could be church discipline. It surely shouldn't have to get that far. Just leadership, really. Will people miss out on the more personal, I mean, literally, touch if they don't come? What about people who are, they need that kind of affirmation? That really, that's their love language. If things remain too much in hybrid and they're the ones stuck on screen, they're missing out in that way. What about those chants, we might say, or providential meetings and conversations when you're just circulating around over coffee? You don't get much of that on Zoom. What about the people who don't have the tech? I could say they're low tech, but what about people who are tech averse? They just don't like this newfangled approach. Are they to be obliged to get the stuff, to get the equipment so that they can join in? And what about people who just don't have the internet? There's somebody we have to phone each week, someone who doesn't have internet or doesn't have enough mobile minutes. And what about singing and music more generally? I think this might actually be quite a big one, because there are very few churches whose musician or musicians can really approach with the kind of stuff, kind of music you can get on YouTube song videos nowadays. So after a year of slick YouTubes, can our voices or our musicians compete again? Do we keep YouTube videos going in part, and your church pianist or music group going in part? Or do we stop the YouTube videos entirely and lose what I think has actually been something I found is quite beneficial? Anyway, I'm sure that's quite enough for me. It's over to you. What do you think?